Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, welcome. I'm really glad you're here today. I think you're going to love this episode with Megan. So much of what we talk about is about how as highly sensitive people, deep thinkers, deep feelers, we really learn about our trait and how we show up in the world, and we learn how to use those things to feel really empowered. And at the end of this episode, she talks about specifically what things have changed for her and how she's just showing up and really embracing and honoring her traits. And I just love this. Megan took the online HSP course a year ago, and I haven't spoken to her in a year. When I do these interviews, I don't find out what's going on with people. I don't prompt them. This is an entirely unscripted, candid episode. We talk about she was in therapy, and I asked, what was it like being in a group? She had some really interesting things to say about that. And if you're a therapist and are concerned that this is going to take away from therapy, it's kind of surprising what she said. And if you are in therapy and you feel like, well, I'm paying my therapist and, they have to be nice to me or they have to respect me, what Megan shares about the group, I think is really powerful. One of the things that Megan and I talked about after we stopped recording is she went into the group expecting to get kind of a guidebook of if this happens, then this is what I do. And if that happens, then this is what I do. And while we're recording, I was picking up on that sense that she felt like she got a lot of these things, but what she thought she was going to get, she didn't get, and that she didn't get specific tools. When we stopped recording and we talked about it, it was like, as HSPs, we often look for externals, like, where's the rule book? If this happens, what am I supposed to do? And what you get in the course is kind of like a user's manual. You get to know yourself and what it is that you're needing, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and really starting to honor that. And like I said, throughout this interview, but especially at the end, it's very concrete how Megan is really embracing how she shows up in the world. And that's a lot harder to articulate, because when I know that how I show up and what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling is okay, that's pretty powerful. And that's different than getting a handbook for this is what you do in a situation. And I think as HSPs, when we learn to turn inward and figure out what's going on with us and what we need, that's when we become really empowered, as opposed to trying to figure out how we're supposed to act to fit in with the rest of the world. Obviously, we want to have social skills. But anyways, a couple of things. I have some offerings coming up in December. If you haven't signed up for my newsletter, you can do so at unapologeticallysensitive.com. There's also a link in the show notes. I'm not sure if I'm going to have anything up on my website, but if you haven't joined the group, the Facebook group, Unapologetically Sensitive, I am going to be posting in there to let people know about some special groups that I'm going to be running in December. You can show up a week at a time. They're very, very, very low cost. So if you're thinking about taking the online HSP course, you want to know what it's like to work with me, you've got questions about being an HSP, you need some strategies to get through the holidays, I want you to have that information. Also, this is Thanksgiving if you're in the US and you're celebrating Thanksgiving. So how are you feeling about Thanksgiving? It's a different one this year. My son is not coming home. This is the first year that we are not having him at home with us, and I'm feeling kind of sad. If you're in Canada, you already had Thanksgiving. If you're in other parts of the world, are you celebrating or are you not celebrating? Is this just another week? I am going to try and drop a bonus episode this week. I'm recording this a few weeks ahead of time. There's a lot going on, so no guarantees, but just check your podcast app. Let me tell you a little bit about Megan. Megan Wurst works in early childhood education and specializes in helping parents and childcare providers support infant and toddler development. She's currently working on a graduate certificate in Infant Toddler Mental Health. Megan learned about the term highly sensitive person while studying neurodiversity and immediately recognized herself, which led to a quest for more information and the discovery of the Unapologetically Sensitive podcast. And now, on to the show. Hey, Megan, welcome.
Hi.
I'm really excited to talk to you today. We haven't talked for almost a year now.
Yeah.
And so I don't really know what's going on with you. But before we start, do you identify as a highly sensitive person?
I do.
And when did you find out you were an HSP?
I think I sensed it long before I actually put a name to it, but I think I actually put a name to it probably about 3 years ago.
Okay. What do you think of the term highly sensitive person?
I think originally I didn't like it because it gets used against you. You know, people say, oh, you're too sensitive. But the more I have talked to HSPs and kind of thought about that of like, well, what's the opposite of that then is insensitive. And I know I don't want to be that. And so I've grown much more comfortable in it and kind of turning it back on people of like, well, then what does that say about you? If I'm feeling too deeply, are you feeling enough?
Right. It's always relative that many of us have that wound of being too much or not enough. And really, there is no such thing as too much. It's all relative. If I'm having big feels and it impacts you, that maybe you just don't have the capacity today. It's not that I'm too much. It's that you may not have the capacity, but we internalize these wounds and heavy sigh.
Exactly. I think learning about being an HSP has made it so much easier for me to realize that it's not that I'm too much. It's something they can't process. And so that is the largest uphill battle of, having not known what it was for so long and just internalizing so much stuff is now dismantling all of that internalized like structure and belief about myself.
Yeah. That's the big one. And I think when we recognize that this is how we're born, it's how we're wired, there's nothing wrong with us, and other people may not understand, it's not our job to have them understand. Our job is to understand us and what we need and to figure out if the relationship warrants talking about what we need and why. The relationship always warrants what we need, but if we need to talk about our differences and why those differences are there. That felt really messy.
It's helped me analyze relationships. When you say like our needs are important and the relationship warrants that. And so finding those relationships where people were not giving that back to me and being able to say like, oh, this is unhealthy. Like, this isn't something I need to fix. This isn't something I need to repair. This is something I need to walk away from at this point. Like, I've done my bit. I've spoken up. I've shared what I need. It's not being met. I can now walk away and feel comfortable with that and know that I did everything I could for it.
Right. I think that we tend to feel like there's something wrong with us and we've internalized that message that we need to try harder. And because we tend to be not everybody, but many of us are very focused on giving and showing up in the relationship and doing that, we often don't take a pause and look at the reciprocity and to really know that we have value and worth and that it's important for us to have relationships that feel reciprocal and mutual, where we're feeling seen and heard just as much as we are showing up and being present for other people.
Yeah. And I think, for me, with the class, I think that's one of the things that I learned the most from it, of that kind of find your people. Like, my people exist out in the world and my job is to find my people, and that there are other people that think like me, that feel like me, that process things the way I do, and I just have to find them.
Yeah. I want to go back and start at the beginning, but since we're here and I go all over the place, I just want to grab this thought while we can because I'm having a hard day. When you took the course, was this the first time that you'd been in a group of other HSPs?
Yes. And this was actually like my first kind of, it wasn't really therapy, but like positive therapy experience.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this was the first time I had been with a group of people that said, we're HSPs, we feel this way, we're looking at this together. So yes.
So Megan, I have permission to ask you this. You were in therapy at the time that you took the online HSP course.
Yes, I had just started.
Okay. So you were working with your therapist. Did your therapist know about the trait of being an HSP?
Yes. I've had kind of 3 experiences with therapy. So I did family therapy when I was a kid, and we went to therapy every week or whatever it was, and that was never spoken about again, and nobody ever did anything with it. And so I was like, okay, well, that doesn't work. And then I had an experience in college where the therapist just threw medication, and medication is fantastic if it's the right medication for what your issue is. It was not for mine. So once I learned about HSPs, I actually started with your podcast and then was like, okay, I need to actually talk to somebody and figure out how to process this stuff through. And so I did find a therapist who actually had listed in her biography, like works with HSPs and, some of those key phrases. And so it was a very different experience than any of the experiences I'd had before.
So I'm curious to know, what was the difference for you between being in therapy with someone who's familiar with the trait and then being in a group with other HSPs?
Being in a group with other HSPs was a huge validation point for me, because it's one thing if somebody just says, oh yeah, that's normal that you feel that way. And it's a very different feeling when someone says, me too. And so the HSP group was just a huge me too moment. And hearing people put words to things that I had felt but hadn't either acknowledged or didn't have a way to put the words to it, it made the other part of therapy so much easier to be able to say, somebody said this and it made it okay for me to realize that I could feel this. Now, how do I process this?
Right. I often think about it in terms of what we didn't get in our families. So I imagine a highly sensitive child that has a really big response to something and their parent just doesn't understand and isn't able to go like, of course you feel that way. Here's what we can do. And that the parent helps to co-regulate with the child. So the child gets this really normalizing experience that how they show up in the world is okay. Most of us, at least my listeners, did not get that experience. And even when we work with a therapist can say, of course, that's very normal. And that's comforting. But when you're with other people that are having a similar experience and it's a healthy environment and it's very safe, there's no shaming, there's no crosstalk, there's no advice giving, we almost get that experience of what we didn't get in our families of origin. So you're nodding your head. So I want to let you put some words to what I'm saying.
I think that it's exactly that. There's a difference between somebody looking on the outside of your situation saying, oh, that's hard. Yep, that's real. And somebody who's walking through it with you. In the HSP group, we cried together and it was fine. And there was no questions about it. And learning skills of reality checks, I think. And that's something I have taken from that class and continued on of just, am I projecting this? Is this a real feeling? Is this me making up stories? Let me check in with people and that I have the right to ask that. I think just there was so much permission granted to me in that group of, you can recognize these things, you can do these things. And then watching other people, there wasn't solutions given so much, but there were things of like, hey, here's what I've tried. Here's what's worked for me. Have you thought about this? Here's how I process this. There was definitely that support piece too.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you comfortable, or can you think off the top of your head of a couple types of reality checks that you tend to ask the people that you trust?
I don't love how I word it, but my thing is, am I crazy for feeling this? Usually it's after like a conversation or an argument with somebody and going to my trusting people and going, am I overreacting to this? Here's why I'm mad. Here's why I'm upset from this person. Is this a real valid thing to be upset about? I'm still learning to kind of take ownership of it. And it's definitely been a process still, but I'm unlearning 36 years of how I've processed things, but having that trusted group of people to say, nope, I would be mad about that too. Or nope, I would be really upset about that too.
Yeah.
Just being able to ask other people that has been really big, and learning who my trusted people are by asking that question.
And when we do that, we're using mindfulness. So if you and I are having an interaction and I'm questioning my reality, or maybe you had a bad lunch and you're having indigestion, like, I don't know, but I pick up on something from you, or I'm having internal dialogue and I don't check it out, then I'm probably making up a story in my head about what's going on with you. And I'm identified with that. And that's my reality. And when I can pause and go, hey, can I check something out with you? Here's the story that I'm making up in my head. I'm no longer identified with that belief. It's mindfulness because I'm taking a step back and I can pause. I can step out of the story and almost be an observer to go like, hey, can I just check something out? It's a really powerful tool.
It was the knowledge that everything I feel is valid, but not everything I feel is real. So I projected a lot with other people of like, they're not talking to me, they're upset with me, I did something. And it's like, no, they had a horrible day and they just walked in the door 2 minutes ago. Take a breath. And just remembering that there are things going on in other people's lives. I would get so caught up in my own emotional world, I forget other people have their emotional worlds too. That may have absolutely nothing to do with me. And so being able to have that check-in of, am I actually feeling this emotion from you? Or have I created this emotion because of this story that's going on in my head? And then being able to separate things out. And now I get better at catching myself. So, I have an interaction with my boss at work and it was maybe shorter than it usually is. And I can say, she just got out of 5 meetings today. She doesn't have any energy left. This most likely doesn't have anything to do with me. And then I can check in with her later too. And I think one of the great things about where I work now is I've learned to find my tribe. And I have a fabulous boss who will do things like, hey, you were quiet in the meeting today. Is everything okay? And who I can do that back to. And so that has been part of finding my tribe, is finding that spot where I fit.
I love that. What we perceive and feel, like you said, is definitely valid. The meaning that we attach to it, the story we make up in our head, that's a Brene Brownism. That's where we often get into trouble, that I may be perceiving something, but the meaning that I attach to it may not be accurate. And if we've had childhood emotional neglect, our parents were emotionally immature, the way that works out developmentally is, as a child, we don't have the ability or the safety to go like, it's not me, it's my parent. So we feel like everything is about us. That's how we have a sense of control and mastery as kids, that we've done something wrong. And when we have that wound and we grow up, we often continue that narrative of, I've done something wrong. What do I need to do to make things right? As opposed to knowing like, oh, my boss had a bunch of meetings today and just doesn't have the time that they normally do to chat. It has nothing to do with me. That can be so freeing.
It has been such a mindset adjustment. The other side of it too, of I'm not responsible for how they feel. I'm not responsible if someone gets upset because of my choice. If somebody invites me to go somewhere and I don't have time to do that and I say no and they get upset, that's not on me. That's their response to it. That's their emotion to own and to process. And learning that distinction has been huge and hard, but so important, because I used to just take it all on. It's all on me. It's all on me. No. And just the same thing too, if they're not responsible for my emotions. If I go to someone and say, hey, I'm upset about this, can we talk about it? And they say no, that's their choice. And now my job is to process it on my side of the fence.
I'm curious. I haven't really talked to too many people that have been in therapy and took the group at the same time. So I'm just really curious about, I just have a lot of curiosity. Did you notice that what you talked about in therapy changed, or any differences while you were taking the group or after the group?
The group gave me, I think, things that I really wanted to focus on. Right around the time that I took this group, I was going through lots of life changes. I had just changed careers. I had just ended a relationship, and my life was kind of a hot mess at the moment. But it was a really good time to say, I need to address some things, but I didn't know what I needed to address. I knew what I was doing and how I was functioning was not working. And so being in the group and learning about HSP was a really good way for me to kind of weed out, like, okay, this is who I am. These are things that aren't going to change. I'm never going to stop crying when I feel strong emotions. That's not going to change. What I need to do is figure out how I deal with that with other people. Who are my safe people? How do I handle that? How do I respond when people try to shame me for that? How do I get a good sense of who I am? And so within the group, I think that validation for those pieces of, these are things I can't do anything about and wouldn't necessarily want to do anything about. My ability to be sensitive is a huge part of who I am, and it's a huge part of how I connect, and it's a huge part of the work that I do. I work with children, and so they need to see that. They need somebody who can sense their emotions and regulate with them and teach them those skills that I didn't necessarily get taught when I was a kid. I don't want to change those things about me. I don't want to get rid of those things, but I want to understand them and be able to process with them. And so the group kind of started helping me dig through to find the things that I really wanted to work on, and the things that were big triggers for me, and the things that I knew I needed to process through further. So understanding some of those things with family dynamics and how that affected me as an HSP, and relationship dynamics, and where I was setting myself up with people who did not understand my HSP superpower and who did not respect it. It helped kind of guide what I was working on in therapy.
Yeah, it sounds like it enhanced it in a number of ways that really focused you on things that you wanted to take a deeper dive of in therapy.
Yeah, we were a pretty small group. I think we had 10 people, maybe even less than that. But to talk about things as a group, and I kept a notebook while we were taking the class, and I was just looking through it actually kind of in preparation for this and finding these, nuggets that I had marked down of like, ooh, this was something that like hit deep. I need to look more into this. Or, oh, this brought up something. This is going to be something I want to research. Or, man, I need to remember this. This is a great line or a great thought or a book referenced or, something like that. And so it definitely kind of directed where I was taking myself in therapy.
Yeah. I think there were 6 in your group. I never go over 8. So I'm only want to clarify if somebody hears 10 and they're freaking out. At this point, I capped them off at 8, but I think your group had 6.
That very well, maybe. I'm not good with numbers. So.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Did you ever feel overwhelmed by anybody else's feelings? Did it feel too intense? Did it feel like that was a lot of people to be in a group with?
No, I think the trickiest thing was the first couple sessions. It was definitely kind of feeling other people out, because as that HSP, you're kind of going, okay, I know I feel like this. And I think these people feel like this, but I've been told my whole life I'm too much. So am I too much for these people? It's that feeling out of like, are we all safe here? Oh, we are. Oh, we are safe. Okay. Once we got like the first person crying, it was like, okay, we know who we are now. And I think really by the end of that 10 weeks, we had gelled into a really comfortable group.
It's really interesting. It takes about 4 sessions until people start to gel. The exception is if somebody is having emotional stuff and is comfortable sharing early on. I've interviewed a couple of people. The episodes have Ranielle, Kitty, and Heidi, and Kelsey. They've all been on the podcast. I'll try and reference which episodes those are and put them in the show notes. But on the first meeting, Ranielle had something going on and she cried, which just created an amazing cohesion in the group because it created that sense of safety from the bat. But I've had a number of therapists that have taken the course, and one of the therapists on the very first or second group has that wound of being too much. And so they asked, I facilitated, do you want to ask for a reality check? It really doesn't matter who we are and what we know. I think some people have this idea that just because you're a therapist, you've done all your stuff. And as y'all know, you listen to me week by week, hearing about the things that I struggle with. And so I often wonder if therapists, are reluctant to take the course. And I consciously do not ask people what they do for a living because we often use that as a way to kind of mask who we are. And I that's just not part of what we do in the group. If people choose to share what they do, I don't stop them. But this really is about showing up as a highly sensitive person to connect with other HSPs, not about what our roles are and the hats that we wear.
Well, and I think there's assumptions that go along with whatever your job title is, especially if your job title is therapist. It was very revolutionary to me to learn that therapists have therapists. But as I've grown in my understanding of mental health and therapy and understanding that there's not an endpoint. I think when I initially was like, I'm going to take this class and it's going to be 10 weeks and it's going to turn my life around and I'm going to be fixed. And that's not a real thing in anything. Like there's no end to therapy. There's no like, you are now fixed. You are a whole human being. Go forth into the world. Nobody is. And you're constantly going to be triggered by things. You're constantly going to be processing things. And that's really what therapy is. It's someone teaching you how to process things that you don't know how to process. So My expectations at the beginning of the class were very different from the outcomes, but not in a negative way. Like I got so much more out of the class and have continued to get so much more out of the class than I thought going in, but it didn't look like I thought it was going to look.
Yeah, exactly. Can you say a little bit more about what that looked like? You've alluded to a little bit.
My initial mindset was, I'm going to show up to this class. She's going to give me this amazing toolbox of tools and fix all my problems and validate me. And I'm going to go forth into the world. And what I learned was, even if we're HSPs, we're still processing things differently. And what works for you may not be what works for me. And what's possible in your life may not be possible in my life. And so I didn't walk out with a set like prescription, but what I walked out with was the knowledge of, here's how you process, like big picture. These are the things you need to know about. These are the things you need to recognize. These are the things that are valid in you. Take these things that are valid and then find what works for you. Find your tribe of people that you are safe processing through things with. Find the people that are okay when you cry. Find the people that can give you a reality check. And then understand that the rest of the world is not necessarily going to be those people, but you are responsible for you. You need to find out what works.
Yeah. What I like to believe is that you get a toolbox and there are lots of tools, and sometimes the hammer works and sometimes it doesn't. So you pull out a tool and it works this time, and the next time you pull out the same tool and maybe it doesn't work. So then you get another tool. And even the things that you named are all tools about asking for reality checks and figuring out how to communicate your needs, and then learning what to do if you're feeling overwhelmed. That I'd like to believe that you really do walk away with a lot of tools. It's just figuring out what tool do you use and when do you use it. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but does that resonate?
So rather than you handing me my toolbox of like, here's everything you're going to need, and here's the labeled for how it's going to be used, it was, here's a world of tools. Here are some examples of things. Here's how I use this. Here's some things that I use. Sometimes it doesn't work. We find another tool. We find our people. We work together. We figure out something that does. Yeah, so that's kind of how I picture it in my head.
I want to take a step back, and where I would have wanted to start with, but we just jumped in where we did. What was your motivation? You kind of talked about this. What made you decide to take the course, and was it easy or hard to decide? Did you sit on that decision for a while?
I sat on the decision for a while. I think there was actually an earlier class that I thought about signing up for and then didn't. And then was finally like, okay, I need to do this. I had reached a point where I knew I was not operating in the way that I needed to operate. I had a lot of life changes. I'd gone through some really negative things with work and kind of figuring out what I wanted to do, and negative experiences with coworkers or managers and that kind of stuff. And I was like, I need to understand what I need, because my feelings had not been validated in the ways that they needed to. I couldn't put down a list of, here's what I need. Here's what I know. I didn't know what to even ask for from other people, or what I could ask for from other people. I knew that I needed to make some changes, and I had been listening to your podcast, and there was a lot of really great information in it. I knew that I had to do something, and that was going to be a really good step. And so I wavered back and forth, and finally was just like, I have to do this. I have to do this for myself. And because it was only 10 weeks, I think that was easier too than like jumping into something that was a bigger commitment. Even with my therapist at the time, I was like, it was a week by week of like, am I going to come back next week? I don't know yet. Am I going to? So I needed something small to start with and say like, can I handle this? Is this going to work for me? Is this something I can take on right now? And it was.
When the course finished, now we've had a year, because I think it takes time to integrate what we learn. I think it's not like we sit down and I go like, okay, this is what you're walking away with today. And so I think it takes time for people to integrate what they've gotten from the course. I'd like to hear your feedback about that.
Definitely. And it's practice. For me, there was literal mindset changes. And just like with any habit, you have to replace that habit with something else. And you have to practice that new habit for so long before it becomes, it's easy. My initial thought of the class was, I'm going to do 10 weeks and it's going to be great and I'm going to be changed. And I kind of got to the end of the 10 weeks and I'd learned all this great stuff. And I was like, okay, but now what? I'm not meeting with this group. And so how do I integrate this? The group identified places where I wanted to work and things that I wanted to learn and things that I wanted to repeat of, this was a good thing. This felt good. I want to do this. And so for me, part of that too was I actually started a Marco Polo group with a couple of gals from the class, and we still, almost a year later, talk on a regular basis and just send messages and practice some of these things with each other. Sometimes a couple times a week. Sometimes we don't talk for 2 or 3 weeks, but there's that check-in and that chance to practice. And for me, coming out of the class, there was a lot of things I wanted to learn more about. So it was getting books and researching this deeper and practicing these things. And a lot of it comes down to the conversations I have in my head of, is this a story that I'm coming up with right now, or is this what's actually happening? And so practicing the way I speak to myself, practicing finding the right people, practicing just all of the tools that came out of it. So what I walked away with was a lot of stuff I wanted to learn about. For me, I mean, right now I ended up going back to graduate school to study infant toddler mental health because I am so interested in what happens in those first few years and how that connection is so impactful. And so that's led me down my own rabbit hole of that too.
I love that, that sense of attachment and emotional intelligence and mirroring what kids experience just lays an amazing foundation for mental health and mental well-being after that. So it's exciting to hear that.
Well, and I think it's made me become more aware of trying to understand other people in a different way, not just what they're saying, but why they're saying it and where that's coming from, and helping to understand people's own situations. So even if they're not an HSP, I'm still understanding things about them and starting to kind of learn things about people that way. And I think it's made me a lot more aware of where my biases are, where I'm projecting my own stuff onto other people, and just a lot of that kind of interactions, and learning that whole my side of the fence versus their side of the fence. So there's been a lot that came out of it for sure.
Wow. If someone is thinking about taking the course and they're not really sure, because I know that I struggle especially if something is an investment, I feel like I've taken stuff before. I don't know if I'm going to get anything out of it. I know a lot. What if it doesn't meet my needs? Is there anything that you can say that might help somebody make that decision if they're not sure?
I mean, part of it is you're going to get out of it what you put into it. If you just show up to class and you don't really ask questions and you don't contribute and you sit in the back, you're not going to get that much out of it. Being part of it, those connections are so important. And I think that's what I liked so much about this program is that it really was about connecting with the other people in my group. It wasn't here's your curriculum, read your book, we're going to come talk about it next week. There was that. There was videos, there was curriculum, we had things that we talked about, but sometimes we went off topic to talk about what was happening with people or how we were feeling and checking in. And it was about getting those connections. And what I ended up finding out for me, I think in some ways the connection was more important than whatever the material was. I have tons of material. I got lots out of it. I have lots of notes and lots of things that I learned. But the biggest overall feeling for me was I got connection. Mm-hmm. And as an HSP, that was something that is often lacking for me, is that deep, solid, I see you, you see me connection. Mm-hmm. And so that made a huge difference for me. And understanding and going into it, remembering you are not going to have that connection day one. Mm-hmm. And so making sure you're adjusting your expectations, that connection takes time, but it was such a safe space to make connections. And, you're not necessarily going to connect with everyone either. I don't keep up with everyone from the group, but I do have people that I do talk to regularly or that I become friends with on Facebook, and we kind of monitor each other. And so there's different levels of connection, but that connection piece was so worth it for me.
Mm-hmm. And what I want to say is that you and I are both highly sensitive extroverts, so that sense of engagement is really important for us. And I've had a number of introverts that have taken the course, and it's easy as an extrovert to think nothing's going on. And if you're an introvert and you show up and you observe and you're really taking in information and that's how you learn, that is valid too. So there's a little bit of a bias in your expression because you're seeing it through the lens of an extrovert, and that's what makes you feel connected. And if you're an introvert and you just want to come and show up and observe and you're not one to really participate a lot because you're taking in information. That works too. And I don't have any expectation about how people show up or not. So I just always want to be sensitive to the introverts who tend to get a bad rap about, they're not talking enough and they're not showing. It's like, I get it. You are just as active as those of us that are engaging and talking.
Yeah, I think you are exactly right. I tend to engage by inner talking, but yeah, just being part of it. And even if you're not talking, hearing somebody say the thing that you are feeling or the question that you're wanting, as you just feel it right in your core of someone else knows what this is like. Someone else feels this too. It's not just me. I'm not too much. I'm not out of hand. I'm not overreacting. I think you can connect even without speaking, but you have to go in with, an open mind to it and an open heart to it.
Sure. I love hearing too that some of you have stayed connected. That is one of the things that's been the most challenging about talking about the groups, that I'd say the majority of groups, at least a core group of them, have stayed in touch via one way or another, but I can't guarantee what kind of a connection you're going to have. And I have to say that since you took the course, I've added extra videos about expectations and disappointments and taking feedback that I've gotten from previous groups about what worked and what didn't work. I'm constantly tweaking and making adjustments, but if you can connect with other people, it really is a nice benefit. And I have no control over whether that happens or not.
I don't know if you've changed the expectations since we had the group, but I think it was partway into the group. And I think you included an email, like, if you guys want to email each other, you can do that. And it was just like, oh, we're allowed to talk to people. Oh, okay. And we were all kind of waiting for that permission of am I allowed to talk to people? And so, and I think somebody started a group chat and was just like, hey, I'm just throwing it out there. If you don't want to be part of this, totally fine. If you do, great. And, people kind of have come and gone from it, but there's been a core group of 3 of us that are we talk on a regular basis. It's interesting. We're kind of each other's processing crowd of we know the language that we're speaking. I have my safe people, but they don't necessarily speak the same language because they may not be HSPs or they may not. I think just in the class, we learned some common language. And so I think that's helped to have some of those people to reference back to.
Definitely. Again, I'm going to refer back to a family of origin that had we gotten that in our family of origin, you have your family talk, your family speak, and certain things mean certain things because you have commonly shared experiences. A lot of us didn't get that in the ways that we would have liked to around our emotions and how we show up, and having that common experience from the course. If it works to stay connected, you've got that commonality, and that it's like coming home. I mean, that's what it is for me when I feel like I've found my people and I'm struggling with things. And I still have that thing of, I feel like I'm being too much or I'm being too negative, because when things that are hard that happen and I'm processing through them, I just need to honor that processing place. And it usually, I'm struggling with something right now, and it's hitting on my history and not feeling seen and heard and honored. And so I'm having to just kind of straddle the fence between the healing part that I know that it's okay, and then the part of me that just goes into the feeling hurt and angry and negative. And I've got people around me that are just right there with me going through it, which I couldn't do this if I didn't have that. And I'm so grateful. Y'all know who you are. So thank you.
That's what I think the biggest thing that came out of the HSP group for me was understanding that there will be those people who understand. They may not be there right then. They may not be around, but there will be those people. There will be those people who will never look at you and say you are too much. That was really moving for me. And that was a real mindset shift for me of being able to accept myself.
Yeah. And, we talk about, you've got to love yourself first. But if we never had anybody reflect that love to us, sometimes we need to get it from other people first to get that mirror that we're lovable, that our feelings aren't too much, that we're not being too dramatic, we're not being too picky, we're not thinking too much or worrying too much. sometimes we need to have that mirrored to us to get the sense that, oh, I really am okay. And from that, then we learn to take those messages and reparent ourselves. And I see stuff all the time of like, you've got to do it yourself. And it's like, well, if you don't have anything and you don't know what it looks like and you don't know that you're okay, then how can you give that to yourself and that there's nothing wrong with having that interdependence? It's healthy. It's normal. If I look to you for all of my needs and I'm not willing to do anything myself, well, that's problematic, but that's not what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's the modeling is a huge part of it. Part of what I enjoy about your podcast and your program and working with you is that you model it. You show up and say, I'm not 100% today. Here's what's going on. And you make that okay. And that was something from the classes that I don't think I fully understood at the time how much that meant and that transparency until I realized like how often we show up and hide in situations and we put on, this professional self or our family self or our public self, and how damaging that is to connection and how damaging that is to the energy that needs to be passing between us. And so I love that model of here is how much I can show up today. It has nothing to do with you. This is my, limited number, but I'm here. I'm here and we're going to go from here, and here is an okay place to be. And, modeling from other people in the group, like you said, of someone else feels what I feel and we can regulate together. And that is when we, look at infant development, infants' systems cannot regulate themselves. That's why skin to skin is so important. Their heartbeat learns from your heartbeat. Their lungs learn from your lungs and the way you breathe. Their system learns from your system. And when we didn't learn that, we can't magic that out of nowhere. I can't read a book that's going to teach me how to regulate myself. I need to actually sit with somebody who can help me regulate. And even if that's over Zoom, like the way our classes, what breaks my heart is I think our class would be so cool if you could do it in person, but you wouldn't get the variety of people that you get. But even over Zoom, to have somebody cry with you, to have somebody model, this was my day and it was really hard, and here's how I'm handling it. Here's how I'm treating myself. And learning an understanding of self-care has totally changed. Self-care is not just bubble baths and naps. Those things are super important. But sometimes self-care is, I'm checking this stuff off my list because I have to show up today and this has to get done. And now my brain won't focus on it for the rest of the day and I can do other things. And understanding that mindfulness and checking in with yourself is part of self-care of what has to get done right now. Is it that I need to take a nap? Is it that I need to eat because I'm going to yell at somebody? Is it I need to cry for a little bit and then I'll be okay? Is it I need to take a walk? So learning those skills from other people, and just hearing kind of how they've handled things. What was cool about our group, there were people in different places in their lives. I think age-wise, we were all pretty close, but some people were married. Some people were in jobs they'd done forever. Some people were in small towns. Some people were in large towns. Some people were in Canada, but we're all dealing with the same basic set of things. It was interesting just to see how similar we handled things and how differently we may have handled things.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And even when I talk about HSPs, I often forget to say that we have similarities, but we are still as diverse as can be, that even within the trait of being an HSP, it shows up really differently for all of us.
Yeah, that mindfulness check-in, for someone it may be yoga, for someone it may be running, for someone it may be taking a nap. It's the same central process of like checking in with your system, but then what your system does with that may be different. And so learning that that's okay too, of I don't have to fix it this one way too, I think also helps.
One of the things this has been kind of rolling around in my mind while we've been talking is I think I've heard people say that often they feel like their therapist is just being nice to them because they're paying them, which if you have a good therapist, I can tell you that I love my clients. I care about them. I think about them outside of session. But I think one of the things that happens with the group is because you get to be with other people that if that's your narrative and it's not an accurate narrative, if you have a good therapist, that, nobody in this group is being paid to like you, to relate to you, to share with you. So was that part of what you experienced of like, nobody really had a vested interest in making you feel good. They were just there for themselves. But that group experience, I think, can be pretty powerful.
Once you put words to it, that's exactly it. Because especially as HSPs, and if you've been given this narrative that you're too much, I think in a lot of interactions with people, I'm like, oh my God, are they just being nice? Am I boring them? Do they not want to hear about this? So yeah, being in a group of people that are all there for the same purpose, and they don't need to talk to me. They don't need to be nice to me. They don't need to check. There's zero requirement to do any of those things. So knowing that it's not something I even really thought about it until you just put words to it there. Yeah, it's that authentic connection of this person's asking me how my day is, and I'm allowed to say it's terrible. And no one's going to make any judgment about that. And nobody's going to ask me for details if I don't want to give them. So yeah, I think that was a great help to kind of learn that there can be authentic, and that there are going to be people that are interested in me for who I am.
Yeah.
However I show up that day.
Did you ever feel any pressure to share, or was there anything about the group that felt unsafe or made you feel awkward? I'm talking about not our own awkwardness of talking about things that are vulnerable, but did you ever feel a pressure to share more than you wanted to, or feel pushed, or have to do something that didn't feel okay? Anything that just didn't feel safe to you?
No, I think one of the things, again, that I took from the group was that permission piece. And there was always that you don't have to share if you want to. There was, we'd kind of round robin things, but if somebody said, I can't right now, there was never a question about that. There was never you need to explain yourself. There was never somebody's going to ask you about it later, so there was questions were always asked with the caveat of, if you feel like sharing. It's the same thing in this interview and talking with you, but for me, that was something I had to learn, that's okay. It's okay for me to ask permission, and B, it's okay for me to not give permission for those kinds of things. So I felt very safe in the group. We had a really good group of people, and I didn't ever feel like anything was being shared out of the group, or there wasn't pressure put on me by you or anyone else in the group to give more information or be a part of things I didn't want to be a part of. I think we all kind of had days where, we'd show up to class and maybe we just weren't in it that day, and nobody pushed you to do it, and you just had a quieter day that day. I mean, definitely there was all of our own awkwardness of like, oh, do I talk? Do I talk now? Oh, somebody else is talking. Is it my turn? Do people want to hear this? And I've noticed even with my group from this group that I still talk with, we've taken those things, and we still have that, like, is this too much to share? Or somebody will even say at the beginning of their polo, like, hey, I'm an event, so if you don't have the space for this, listen to it later, or you could just skip it. And we've picked up that ability and that recognition of permission.
Yeah. Yeah. And I tell everybody at the beginning of group, and every week we talk about, we learn to show up in the world and figure out what everybody else needs and how we can fit into the other 80%. And this course is really about you and what you need. So if you need to turn your video off, if you need to eat, if you need to go to the bathroom, if you need to not share, that it really is about figuring out what you need and not showing up and pleasing me, because I've been talking a lot about boundaries recently, and I really would prefer to use the term of authenticity and vulnerability, that when I know what I'm thinking and feeling and needing, I can ask for that. And that's how I take care of myself. And the feedback I'm getting from the current group I'm running, that makes so much more sense in talking about boundaries. Like, what is a boundary? But if I know that, hey, this is what I'm needing today, and I let you know that, it's my job to figure out how to take care of myself. And that's a huge part of what happens in every single group. But I don't say like, hey, this is boundaries. They just create the safety in the group for people to take care of themselves.
That's a good point that you make, because I have heard the boundaries thing for so long and I didn't understand it. And finally it was the fence thing of, you take care of what's on your side of the fence and they take care of what's on their side of the fence. And learning that distinction for me of, oh, like, I'm responsible for taking care of myself. Like, I can't wait for somebody to offer this up. I need to ask for it if it's really important to me. So that was a good learning experience. And I think one of the other things about the group that had a real feeling of safety for me was that we were allowed to have our strong emotions. So usually it was crying. But what was different is in, non-HSP groups, if I've cried over something, it becomes this big deal of, oh my gosh, you're upset. And then that makes it almost, more embarrassing and harder to deal with. Whereas in this group, it's like, yep, you're allowed to do that. And we're going to move through this emotion. And that was what needs to happen. And so it was, I'm allowed to feel this and nobody's going to make a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that was really important for me to see that.
Yeah, all feelings are okay. And many of us, I'm totally a crier. So when people cry and they start apologizing, it's like we celebrate tears. We welcome tears. There's room for you. It's just how we show up. My kids know I'm criers too. I worry and I'm a crier. So I often will end my text with, I'm your mom and I worry and I'm really good at it. Just how I'm wired.
I had to laugh in a work meeting last week. We watched a Brene Brown clip on trust, and it was, kind of a team building kind of thing. And we were sharing out afterwards, and I am bawling because that's who I am. And I cry at all strong emotions. And I know that I work in the right place when not a single eye batted during that meeting. I cried, I shared, we moved on, and it is not something that I would have imagined experiencing a year ago.
Yeah. And you know that it's okay. And that creates permission around the people around you to allow that to be okay. So you don't go into this like, I'm so sorry, I'm crying. It's like, I'm a crier. This is what I do.
Yep. And it's like, these are going to fall and I'm going to still share my information, and it doesn't change the information I'm sharing and it doesn't change this experience, but this is going to happen while I do this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that I think has been a huge weight off of me in understanding an HSP of these things are valid. These things happen, but here's how I deal with them. Because it's not something I have to be ashamed of. It's not something that I have to continually apologize for, which therefore brings more attention to it and makes it this whole big thing that it didn't need to be. And I think that's what's interesting about HSPs is, other people focus on our sensitivities so much that we get sensitive about our sensitivities, and then it amplifies it and makes it harder to work with them.
And the reality is you crying and being okay with it. That's a boundary. This is what I need. This is what I do. I'm okay with it. This is how we deal with it. And it's not like you send out a memo to everybody. This is my boundary. But, I think so much of what happens in the course that we integrate, and because I don't say like, this is how we set a boundary, we integrate so many skills that we don't even know that we walk away with because that's how it's supposed to be.
Well, and one of the things that I have taken from you is that question of when other people get upset about us feeling strongly, well, what is that bringing up for you? Like, why is me crying an issue for you? And then turning that back on myself too, of like, when I get irritated with people for things, what is that bringing up in me? Maybe that's something I need to look at in myself. And so that's been really big, but just being able to turn that table, to take that power in myself of this is how I'm showing up. If that's an issue for you, that sounds like something on your side of the fence, and we can talk about that if you'd like to. But that little bit of empowerment and just a little bit of like, nope, this is a core piece of who I am, and I'm good with that.
I love that. And that's really what an empowered and enlightened and educated HSP is. This is who I am. This is how I show up. And if this is uncomfortable for you, then we can talk about it, or you can go figure out somewhere else what that activates for you, but it's not my stuff. I'm just showing up being me. And that is beautiful.
Yes, it's life-changing. I would even venture to say for me anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Megan, we need to wrap up. I'm loving this conversation. I just want to keep talking. We're a little bit over time, but is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you feel like is important to bring up before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. I think we had a good conversation.
We did. I love this. Thank you so much for hopping on with me today and sharing your experience. And it's always exciting for me to hear what's been going on and what the changes are, because unless you reach out to me, I really don't have any idea once the course is over. Some people, we stay in touch and some people don't. So Yeah, it's just nice to hear that you're doing so well.
Well, it was interesting to go back and look at my notes and see like what were big triggers for me and think about how, a year later, I operate differently in some of those areas. And so it was cool to kind of really think about the growth that's happened. So thank you.
Well, and what I think happens is when we have the negative activation or the intensity around negative things, those really stick with us. But because we take in information, we learn, we absorb, we integrate so well that we often are so successful in taking in new skills that it doesn't even register for us, which is why it's important for me to talk about it and put words to it, because there were things, it sounds like a year ago, that were real struggles for you that you don't struggle with now, but you weren't even thinking about those until you went back and looked at your notes. That's kind of the nature of things. So it can be really helpful when we reflect and we go like, oh yeah, I don't struggle with those things anymore. Woohoo.
Well, and it's small changes. It wasn't 10 weeks of class and everything was revolutionized.
Right.
It was, this was validated, and then this was validated, and then this was validated. And then I tried this and this worked. And it was all these little pieces. And when the change is so small like that, you don't notice.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you look back and go, oh, I climbed a mountain.
Exactly. Well, Megan, thank you so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye. Hey again. So I'm curious to know what you thought. Because I'm having a discombobulated day, I had to re-record the intro and realize that I forgot to share some information with you. Once COVID is over, I don't know what my excuse is going to be. What I had said is that this is a totally unscripted conversation. When I have people on that have taken the course, I haven't spoken with Megan in a year, and we don't talk about anything before we record. So it really is an unscripted, honest account of what her experience was. What I love, especially at the end, is just how Megan has really come to accept the traits that she has of being highly sensitive. And we talk about this is what being an educated, enlightened, empowered HSP is, that we're going to show up in the world the way that we're wired. And when we're okay with it, that is really when we have so much more freedom. So I want to tell you about a number of things. I don't talk about these things all the time on the podcast. There's a closed Facebook group called Unapologetically Sensitive. There are a couple questions to ask to join. I have a newsletter. I will be starting the online HSP course in January. You can go to my website at unapologeticallysensitive.com. There's an HSP groups page. There's a registration form there. There are people that have signed up for the course. So by the time you hear this, I don't know how many spots will be left. With the year that we've just come out of, my guess is that with COVID, 2021 may be a little bit bumpy. I don't know. I really don't know, but it's such a great opportunity to get support, to be with other people, to feel seen and heard, to learn more about the trait, how to lean into it. I know I keep saying it's transformational, but that's really what I see with people that have gone through the course. If you're interested in working with me, I have a couple slots right now. I'm not sure where I'm going to be at when you hear this. Feel free to reach out to me at, again, my website, unapologeticallysensitive.com. Whatever you're feeling this week, the holidays are going to look different this year. It is what it is. I know some people hate that phrase. What I would suggest is to find a way to honor if you're having feelings about the holidays not looking the same as they normally do. If you've had loss, we've all had losses here, change, all of that stuff, to find a way to honor it. And if there's a way that you can focus on some of the things that you have gratitude for. I've used the term this week about straddling, that I often will hold up one hand, like this is the part that's hard, and hold up the other hand, palm up, both palms up. And knowing that we can honor the things that are working and honor the things that are feeling challenging. And we've gotten through most of 2020, and boy, it has been a doozy. And there have been some real gifts and blessings that have come out of this year. So I'm sending you good juju, good thoughts, comfort, love, a sense of well-being, kindness, compassion. I hope that you are doing well. I care about each and every one of you. I'm very, very, very grateful for all of you who are here that have listened to the podcast, that have shared it, that have communicated with me. Just sending out lots of good juju. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.